The British Finance Minister is set to unveil the government's plan to kickstart the economy after coronavirus. His so-called mini-budget expected to include new measures to tackle youth unemployment. Boosts for the cultural sector, infrastructure and greener home improvements have already been announced. Well, for more, let's speak to our business editor, Stephen Carroll. Stephen, firstly, give us an idea of the outlook for the UK economy that the Minister is trying to improve.
Well, like all major economies, the past few months have been devastating for the UK. If we look at the OECD's most recent forecasts, which were published last month, they predict that the UK will be the worst hit among developed economies, with a shrink of 11.5% in the size of its gross domestic product, the size of its economy this year. Unemployment, the OECD says, is set to rise to over 9% this year in the UK, but will still be over 8% in 2021. That also comes, of course, as there are an awful lot of people who are being paid by the government in the UK, as is the case in many parts of Europe as well. The furlough scheme in the UK has over 9 million people on it at its peak, from the latest figures that we have from the British government. Rishi Sunak, as finance minister, faces the same challenges as finance ministers everywhere in Europe, and that is everywhere in the world, really, which is how to get people back to work and to ensure that as businesses reopen, that there will be work for them to go to, because the people on that furlough scheme, that's due to come to an end at the end of October, and if that as people come off that scheme, they want to make sure those people get back to work, essentially. Now, the UK is also facing its own unique set of challenges because of Brexit. The end of the transition period with the UK, the European Union, is at the end of this year. That provokes another cliff edge moment that could potentially see things, if there's no deal, get more difficult for the UK to trade with the European Union. That's the sort of uncertainty businesses don't need on top of everything else that's happening.
OK, so that doesn't sound overly positive, Stephen. So what sort of measures is the Finance Minister expected to unveil?
Let's take a look, first of all, at the life support that Rishi Sunak unveiled earlier this year. And this is how the UK government has been supporting the economy during this crisis. It spent over 30 billion euros, the equivalent of, on its furlough scheme, employment support for self-employed people, almost 9 billion euros, and loans to businesses of over 50 billion euros. Now, London is shifting more to the medium to long-term effects to try and help the economy to recover. Boris Johnson last week announcing a new investment infrastructure plan. That's over 5.5 billion euros. As is common in British politics, before big budget announcements, even though this isn't a real budget, there are a lot of announcements that have been made in advance. So we know already that Rishi Sunak is going to be unveiling support for the arts and culture sector. That's worth around 1.7 billion euros, a new scheme that'll help 30,000 trainees in the UK, and more than 3 billion euros for new green investments, including vouchers for households to help upgrade their homes to make them more environmentally friendly. Now, on top of that, it's being widely reported today in the British media that Rishi Sunak is going to unveil a new scheme to help youth unemployment. It's going to essentially mean people aged 18 to 24 will be able to have their wages paid by the government, providing labour essentially free at cost to companies. So that will be a big boost to try and target some of those people worst affected by this crisis, because we know that young people and those in precarious jobs have been much more likely to lose work and lose income over the past few months. Other measures that we're seeing floated around that were under discussion would perhaps be a reduction in value-added tax for the hospitality industry, a targeted measure that might help them there. We'll have to wait and see how big the overall package is, because Germany, for example, their recovery package was worth 130 billion euros. We're expecting this to be a very big figure from the UK as well. France, for its part, the French government has said that it's going to announce its recovery plan in September, as it's dealing with the immediate effects of the crisis right now.
And then one wonders, how will all this be financed? But that's a question for another day. Stephen Carroll, thanks a lot for that update.